The year is 1938. The steps of history are accelerating, and the European continent is heading toward war with rising tensions. The First World War ended 20 years ago, the war that was supposed to end all wars, but it resulted from deep-seated tensions between the nations of the continent. The new nation in Europe, Germany, the most powerful, the most populous, and the most industrially advanced, had established itself as a superpower. The old great powers, France, Russia, and Britain, rejected the new contender. Rejection and rivalries turned into a terrible war. Europe mourned the loss of an entire generation of its finest and bravest youth. When the war ended, it didn't end in a clear or decisive manner, but in a way that meant a major war would soon return to Europe. Germany, despite its defeat, remained the strongest and largest nation in all of Europe. The Germans believed that their army had not been truly defeated. The German people had not witnessed their country being invaded, nor had their cities, towns, villages, or countryside been destroyed. The German soldiers returned home in an orderly fashion, not like a defeated army. This gave rise to the myth of the stab in the back, a betrayal by internal enemies. The Treaty of Versailles was not a peaceful settlement, but rather a punishment for Germany, involving the loss of territories and imposing massive reparations to compensate for the war and rebuild France, and to pay off European debts to their ally America. The treaty also crippled the German armed forces, which had been a source of national pride. The German army was drastically reduced and stripped of most modern weapons. Yet, the settlement did not destroy Germany as a source of threat or competition, but instead deepened German resentments. The new map of Europe created a group of weak states along Germany's borders, states with which Germany had unfinished business. The Treaty of Versailles kept the memory of war alive in the minds of all Germans. In Germany, which was still suffering from one economic crisis after another, a movement and a leader emerged, expressing these grievances and promising action. A movement that promised salvation, and a leader who promised reform and the revival of German destiny. Hitler and the Nazis came to power through the democratic structure of Germany, only to dismantle those very freedoms. Germany began systematically dismantling the settlement of the First World War and the European structure it had created. Across the continent and the world, events were rapidly unfolding. Japan had turned toward military rule, fueled by a belief in Japanese racial superiority. In fact, the war had already begun in 1937 with Japan's brutal and ruthless attack on China. War returned to Europe as Spain was torn apart by civil war, with fascism and communism pouring fuel on the flames while the democracies struggled to survive. Italy, the second fascist power in Europe, embarked on a campaign of conquest, occupying Ethiopia, an independent African state. The lesson being sent to the world was that violence was a means to achieve one's goals, and that it could not be opposed. Hitler nullified the Treaty of Versailles and rearmed the German nation, directing his aggressive and hungry gaze toward his weak neighbors. Germany united with Austria, a move that made Germany even stronger and shattered the democracies. America retreated behind its oceans in isolation, while France tried to defend itself by building the Maginot Line as a shield against aggression. But France feared the renewal of war. Britain did not want war and believed that Hitler's demands were fair. The democratic nations sought to resolve the German problem without resorting to war, through diplomacy, negotiations, and fair settlements. The word used to describe this approach in history was appeasement. In the autumn of 1938, Hitler turned his attention to Czechoslovakia. A summit conference was called in Germany, Munich. After the union with Austria, all of Europe realized that something else was about to happen, and they knew that Czechoslovakia was next. In October 1938, the leaders of Europe's great powers gathered in Munich for the first modern summit conference. It wasn't a diplomatic meeting held in palaces. The leaders traveled to a meeting held before the cameras of the global news media, under the eyes of the public, and made statements to the press. When I return, I will be able to say that the dark tragedies of war are over and that the danger has passed. Thank you. The rose will bloom in peace. They met to solve the problems of Czechoslovakia, a democratic state allied with France and a thorn in Hitler's side. Geographically, it pierced the Reich, and politically, it challenged Nazi ideas and beliefs. Czechoslovakia was an isolated nation, separated from its ally France by Germany, surrounded by unfriendly states. If the summit failed, if Hitler and the Nazis moved against Czechoslovakia, there would be no middle ground for France and Britain. Sanctions or supplying weapons would not protect Czechoslovakia from Nazi aggression. It would require a total war in Europe. The nation whose fate was on the table in Munich had a modern army but wasn't politically strong. Czechoslovakia wasn't a nation solely for Czechs. This modern democratic society contained Slovak, Hungarian, and German minorities. The Sudeten Germans, 3 million strong, lived in regions bordering Germany. The union with Austria had ignited their enthusiasm, and they became inflamed, driven by the calls of history, destiny, and blood. Austrian citizens had abandoned democracy for nationalism, and the Sudeten Germans were heading in the same direction. Hitler did not need to incite the nationalist feelings of the Sudeten Germans. They already existed. Of course, Hitler sought to challenge his fellow Germans and wanted to destroy the Czech nation as an ally of France, as well as weaken the modern Czechoslovakian industrial economy. When the leaders met, each had different goals. Both Hitler and Czech President Beneš wanted solutions, but neither wanted to make concessions. The Czechs knew that any concessions to the German mentality would lead to further demands. Hitler wanted total success. The French and British wanted to offer some concessions. They didn't want to face the risks of war or humiliation during the negotiations. The British, led by Chamberlain, believed that the Sudeten Germans were a wronged minority oppressed by the Czechs. France had an alliance with Czechoslovakia, established in France's interest to threaten Germany with a war on two fronts. Now they realized their inability to help their ally, but desperately wanted to avoid the humiliation of breaking their promises to the Czechs. Chamberlain hesitated, saying, "If Germany is truly determined to destroy Czechoslovakia, I do not see how that can be stopped." The goal of Britain and France at Munich was not to reign in Germany or oppose Hitler's ambitions, but to force the Czechs to make concessions to avoid a major European war. This translation captures the essence and structure of the original text. Let me know if you'd like any adjustments or further parts translated.